Hey everybody, and welcome back to another X-Wing repaint. And in this case, it's actually an X-Wing repaint. We are working on the Dameron orange and black T70 X-Wing. And before I get started, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of pre-paint process, which is research of the specifics of this paint scheme. Now, you would think, with as popular a design as this is, that there would be no end to really good research material out there. But as it turns out, that is not really the case. On the other hand, there is a lot of photo reference of toys and models and other things related to this X-Wing, but there's very little direct reference to the screen version of this X-Wing. So all throughout this process, I spent a lot of time looking for what exactly something looked like from this angle or that angle, and probably the biggest thing for me was everything gray, with all these sort of gray elements. Let's just call them all gray elements, because in one sense they are all kind of chromatically neutral. Are all the gray elements actually gray, or is there some metallic in there as well? And the only good reference I could find, really the only believable reference that I could find, were the screen caps from overhead video taken from that one set. And with that photo, I was able to determine that the forward engine cowlings were silver, the exhaust cones were silver, the guns had silver elements. And when I say silver, I just essentially mean, some sort of metallic color. And that was probably the most important find. The other elements that you kind of need to dig around for is the striping. The interesting thing about the striping is that it's essentially identical to what you get, more or less. It's identical to what you get on the X-Wing to begin with. The blue and white standard X-Wing that comes with the starter, for example. But there are some differences, and the differences are really primarily in the wraparound in the nose portion, where the stripe kind of connects from left to right. You would think that would just be one solid color throughout, but it's actually on the left side is gray and not orange. And of course, there's also some breaks. There's some breaks in that coloration as well, so it's not a solid color. And I'm not sure why I was stressing out so heavily over these details, but when I try to match something, I really want it to match as well as I can. I try to want it to match as well as I can up to a point. For example, while the forward engine cowlings are metallic, there is an orange stripe just behind those cowlings. I wasn't going to try to replicate that, because at the scale of the model, it would be way, way too tiny to try to match. The only real way to do that, if you wanted to have that orange there, is to make it wider. Fine, that's one way to go. The way I decided to go, it was to just eliminate it entirely. Anyway, let's get to how we move forward with this. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the markings for Poe's X-Wing are essentially the same as the blue one. And in fact, if you were to make a negative of the blue and white X-Wing, you would end up with Poe's X-Wing, because the opposite of blue is orange, opposite of white is black. So that gives us a lot of room to work with here in terms of how we're going to make these markings work. Because obviously trying to hand paint that striping would be difficult at best. Now, luckily, the back markings, the wing markings, are all on raised detail for the most part. The big blocks of color are on raised detail, so you don't really have to worry about those too much. But the striping on the forward hull, essentially the nose, those are not. So my approach to this was to mask everything off so that I would have nice clean lines after airbrushing the color on. So in order to mask this, I used Tamiya's rice paper masking tape. I have talked about this stuff in the past. For fine work like this, it's really invaluable. The tape is very thin. You can get it in multiple sizes. I actually have a larger width than I normally like working with here, but as you can see, I could just cut it down with an X-Acto knife and make little bits that I could stick in wherever they were needed. The existing blue lines just act as a guide for laying down your mask. So all you need to do is cut some tape, lay it down next to the existing lines until you have everything masked off. And again, you don't really need to do the wing markings, except you might want to do the striping at the rear of the wings. That may help you later on. Not 100% necessary, but definitely helpful. And what I discovered later was that the existing striping there, although it is not on raised detail, if you're light-handed with your airbrush, assuming you're using an airbrush, you can actually see where those stripes exist even after you've painted over them, because the paint has a certain amount of height to it as well. So there's kind of a raised detail there, but it's so faint, you're probably better off masking. Now, what I didn't do was try to mask off those individual stripes. I masked off those stripes entirely because I knew that I could just go back with a brush. That was going to be an easier way to do it than to try to mask those individual stripes. One thing I learned later was that although I wasn't too concerned about the overspray from the orange because I was going to be painting everything else black, that I really should have been more concerned about it. I should have masked better. I figured that black was just going to cover all the orange anyway, and then I realized later that had I left everything gray, I could have washed in my blacks and had a better overall effect at the end. But since the orange was showing through, I had to block in the black completely and then highlight from there. And that's not normally how I like to work if I can avoid it. So once you've got your markings all orange, you can just remove the mask. And then, as I mentioned earlier, start blocking in the black portion, which is essentially the bulk of it. It's important to do it in this order. And the reason for that, of course, is that it is much easier to put black over orange than it is to put orange over black. This is definitely the better direction to work in. And what I ended up doing was putting some lines in with a fine brush to block in the areas closest to the orange, and then go in with a heavier brush to get the bulk. I have to apologize for not showing more of the actual painting work on camera. The truth of the matter is that my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, and I have to get in really close in order to be able to work on something this small. And with that in mind, I can only show certain amounts of this if I want the final product to look good at all. So that's what's going to happen there. So here I'm showing you the stripes gotten started. You can see that they don't just exist on top, they actually wrap all the way around the wing and then come around to the underside. That was actually a little harder than I expected, because originally they didn't wrap around, and so they didn't line up properly when I tried to connect them. So I kind of had to start over on the underside to make that work. And as you can see, I've blocked in I've sort of covered over the stripes on the underside with white to give me a place to start over. And there you can see that I've done that, and I've been working on the metallic colors, the guns on the side, the engine cowlings up front, and the exhaust cones in back has all been done with Leadbelcher. And of course, in order to sort of bring down the metallic some, I'm using Citadel's Nuln Oil shade. Nuln Oil and Leadbelcher work really, really well together, making sure that I've got a fair amount on the interior of the engines so that is suitably grimy. And then a little bit on the engine cowls, a little bit on the guns, a little bit on the exhaust cones. So here I'm using Watercolors Warm Gray number 4 to do some edge highlighting. With blacks, edge highlighting seems to be the best way to really define the sharp edges and corners. Here you can see the difference between the left and right side of that connecting stripe. Getting all of the various lines that go through there takes a fine brush and a steady hand. Normally I would use pens for something like that. The Pigma Micron .005 would be best. But now I'm going to work on BB-8. He's kind of a fun little bit. So I started out by putting just a gray line to define the separation between his head and his body, and that's just again some of that Watercolors Warm Gray 4. And it's really interesting because the shape of the R2 unit in the back of there is really neither a standard R2 unit nor is it BB-8, but it kind of could be either. And when you put that line in there, your eye really says, hey, that's BB-8. Now at this point, I've worked on the head, and the head is a dot of black, a dot of white, a smaller dot on top of the black, another dot in front for the eye, and then a dot of gray next to that, and that sort of defines the design on his head and the design on his quote-unquote face. On the body is a dot of orange with a smaller dot of white inside of that, and then you can kind of do that wherever you like on the body, just as long as it looks right. And you don't really need any more than that to make the BB-8 look believable. And here I'm going to be doing the engine glow, and these are Citadel glazes, and I'm starting out with the, I think it's the Lamenter's yellow, which is the yellow glaze. And although I don't show it, then I added the red glaze inside of that, and then what I ended up with was something that was kind of a deep orange. Now at this point I'm going to be doing the canopy, and for the canopy I'm just going to be using Watercolors blues. What you see there is 5, 4, and 3, but I think I also went all the way to 2. 5 being the darkest and 2 being the lightest of the colors that I used. And really it's just going to be a series of steps of each color from dark to light, leaning towards, on the very front, having the darkest portion towards the front and then the lightest portion towards the rear. But on the sides, it's really more like the bottom and the top, dark to light, bottom to top. But at this point, it's pretty much done. Although this was probably one of the most challenging repaints that I've done. It's not what I would call hard, but it is time consuming. I think I'm about to do another one. I'll be doing a second one of these for another client. And it should go a little bit faster because I don't have to think about so many things and I don't have to do all the research because that part is already done. I know exactly where to do things and how to do things, and I even bought myself some new pens so that perhaps I can do some of those elements a little bit quicker than I did last time. But that's going to do it for today. I hope you found this interesting, and if there was anything I missed in terms of how I approach this, definitely ask me questions. Let me know. Let me know what I need to. Let me know what I missed. Let me know what you need to know. I would love to be able to help you make your Poe Dameron as good as it can be. And that's going to do it for now. Just remember, if you like the video, click like on the video, and if you want to see more of these videos in the future, please subscribe. It's the best way to make sure that you miss as few as possible. And that's going to do it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next video.